Building Resilient Youth in Challenging Times. My name is Gina Kahn, and I am the director of the Hampden Wilbraham Partners for Youth Drug-Free Communities Coalition. On behalf of the coalition and our partners in this particular presentation, the Rotary Club of Wilbraham and Hampden, we are so happy that you are here tonight, and we are going to be getting our program underway. To start, I wanted to briefly take a moment to introduce the coalition and what that's all about. The Hampden Wilbraham Partners for Youth represents a diverse group of community members and agencies working together to reduce teen substance use in the broader context, promoting physical health, mental health, and safety for all Hampden Wilbraham students. We strive for a coordinated, comprehensive, collaborative, and sustainable plan of evidence-based activities and services to prevent and reduce youth substance misuse and promote healthy childhood development. Our activities focus on increasing awareness of community events, environmental strategies, and local policies that lead to a shared responsibility of the roles that all of us play in teen substance misuse prevention. That really comes down to increasing protective factors and decreasing those risk factors. So who are we? A Drug-Free Communities Coalition, as we are funded by the National Office of Drug Control Policy, typically consists of 12 sectors. 12 sectors that represent, in our case, probably more than 100 individuals across the Hampden and Wilbraham community and in Hampden County as well. You see here the list of the 12 different sectors that are represented in an effective coalition. Coalitions are designed to be community-based and to reflect all of these different stakeholders who play a key role in creating those healthy communities that provide our youth with a consistent message that we want them to grow safe, strong, and substance-free. This is work that cannot be done by any one individual or any entity alone. So while you see very familiar, or you could probably connect with one or more of these sectors that you see in your screen, the point is that we need to be working together. If you are with us tonight, you are already part of that equation in whatever hat that you may be wearing, or several hats in most cases. But I hope that you will consider visiting our website. You see there hwp4y.org, Hampden Wilbraham Partners for Youth.org, to learn more about the coalition and how you might be formally involved. As we go through the program tonight and towards the end, I will be giving you a little bit more information about how you might do that. In the meantime, I wanted to share a few basics and logistics on how to maximize your experience with us tonight. Only panelists will be on video and audio tonight. So while we are happy that you're here, we will not be able to see or hear you. Please submit any questions that you may have along the way via the chat function that is usually at the bottom of your screen. The webinar will be recorded and it will be posted on the coalition website in the near future. It usually takes a little while to do whatever tiny bits of editing need to happen and get it into a format that can create that shareable link. But once again, I want to make sure that you visit that website often. That's where you'll see the recording of this webinar, but that's where you'll also see a whole bank of amazing resources and great information. Our presenter tonight, Steve Opalenik, will do his best to get to as many questions or categories of questions as possible related to strategies that support children's mental health and well-being, and that is the topic that brings us here tonight. I want to remind you that questions specific to a particular school or district or program should be addressed to the administrator or counselor at your child's school. And this is especially relevant tonight because although we are a Hampden Wilbraham coalition, our reach tonight has been pretty broad. We had some information in the Hampden Wilbraham Times and across our network. And so we have a wonderful range of a variety of folks from different neighboring communities. So we want to make sure to be clear that those very specific questions should be directed to those people that will know what's going on in your specific child's school or district. At the end of the program, you will receive a link to an evaluation form. Please take a few minutes to complete this, and don't be shy about including topics that you would like to hear about in the future. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce, and I am going to let him tell us a little bit about who he is, our presenter tonight and our tour guide on this journey of building resilient youth in challenging times. Welcome, Steve Opalenik.
Hi guys, I'm Steve Opalenik. Thank you for that brilliant introduction, Gina. I'll tell the people a little bit about myself. I do want to point out, when we practiced this, I was in control of the slides, but now Gina's in it. So there's going to be some transitional stuff happening, but the whole topic about this presentation is adapting. So we're going to roll with it. We're going to get through it. And Gina, if you can still see me, I'll hold a thumbs up to hit the next key. So we can go right into the next one. All right, so my name is Steve. Like I said before, I'm a licensed mental health counselor. I'm a certified mental health integrative medicine provider, which just means, you know, I work with supplements and nutrition to help people with mental health deal with anxiety or depression or anger or trauma. I'm also a yoga 12-step recovery instructor, a certified personal trainer, a youth mindfulness certified instructor, a huge dad joke enthusiast, and a huge geek. You could probably see the Captain America shield in my background in my office here. And then something that's not included on this is that I'm the president and founder of a local nonprofit called the Promethean Project. So Gina, if you want to switch to the next one. So what exactly are we here to talk about? The title's well written and it all makes sense, but you know, that doesn't go into the details of what we'll be looking at. So if we go to the next slide, I'll give you a quick rundown of what the presentation is full of. So first thing is, we're going to look at how youth mental health is affected by this current pandemic, meaning specifically COVID. There's a lot of contributing co-factors that happen when you look at COVID, but this one's specifically about the changes in schools and the changes that youth might be fighting. These symptoms and these things that we go over may be 5 times as strong if youth are dealing with bullying, stigma, racism, or judgment of any kind. So I want you guys to keep that in your mind too, that, you know, this can be complicated through cofactors. So right now we're just really focusing on the current pandemic. We're going to talk about what signs and symptoms and behaviors might indicate that your specific youth might be struggling. And then we're also going to take a look at how to help your youth and yourself thrive instead of just survive, right? Towards the end of the presentation, there will also be some resources that will be included in slides for local resources, so you can follow up on those and kind of check in if you need any support. And then questions and answers, as Gina mentioned earlier today, we'll try to get to them towards the end. So please feel free to submit those through chat as they come up. So I want to start with talking about what mental health is. So if you go on Google and do a quick search like I did, I stole it right from Google. The definition of mental health is a person's condition with regard to their psychological and emotional well-being. However, my definition of mental health is a little bit different. So we're going to look at the components of it. So if you go to the next part, we're going to look at what the definition of mental is. And it really just simply means of or related to the mind. And then we're going to look at what the definition of health is, which is a person's condition. So if you put those together, it's just a person's condition related to the mind, right? It seems simple enough, but what is a mind? So let's look at the definition of a mind. So it's an element of a person that enables them to be aware of the world and their experiences around them, right? So really, it's about the condition and being able to make sense of the world around you. That's really what mental health is. So it's not just your brain. It's just not, not just neurochemicals and emotions. There's a whole bunch of different minds that I like to, as an integrative therapist, take a look at. So tonight, I want you to keep this next slide and the 5 minds that I feel like are important to mental health in mind as we're talking. So the first one is the cerebral mind. And that's basically that brain, that idea of the mind in general, the neurochemicals and how they interact and the different parts of your brain. The second one is the heart mind. Now that is basically because your heart has a lot of input on how you make sense of the world. It has its own neurons in it. It has its own nervous system that connects to your brain and the rest of your nervous system. And so the input we get from that is also very important. The third one would be the digestive mind. So nutrients and food are really important to mental health. And I think this is really important to think about because not only does that play an effect on our emotions and how we view things and manage things, but our emotions also affect our digestive system and our inability to process some things. Fourth mind is what we're going to call the neural mind, really just really looking at the nervous system and how the nervous system warns us and reacts and affects our emotions. There's a really good slide included in here that shows the 3 different levels of the nervous system that I like to focus on. And the last one is the social mind, which is basically just this idea of our social engagement and how that affects us and how we make sense of the world, which is, as you guys could probably guess, a super important part of your youth's lives right now. So keep those in mind. We're not necessarily going to go into them more in depth. I just want to have that conversation so you can be thinking about how what we're talking about affects these different minds and mental health. So kind of talked about that, but this is important because COVID is not just affecting the brain, it's affecting all these minds as well. So how does it affect mental health? Well, COVID, if you want to hit that first one, increases worry about health and the health of others. It also disrupts sleep patterns, right? Like it's affecting our sleep patterns because of worry and focus. It can be triggering to previous trauma responses or can cause its own trauma response in youth and in adults. It increases isolation. Obviously, there are mandates in place and we're not as social as we have been, but it also increases isolation within the household as well. It disrupts routines. We're creatures of habits mostly, and our brain is amazing, but also lazy and really likes to have pattern recognition happen. And when those routines fall out of place, it does kind of disrupt how the minds interact. It creates what we call catastrophizing, which means we get some kind of input, and rather than look at the reality of the situation and the steps that relate to it, we go to the worst case scenario and create this catastrophe that could just be a small bit of information that really doesn't lead that way. It also increases perseverating thoughts, which is this idea of not being able to shake loose a random thought pattern or thoughts that keep coming up. You're a victim of that thinking, and so it increases that inability and actually helps to disrupt sleep patterns because you can't shut off those thoughts in the brain. It also creates this need for control, right? Like, I don't know about anyone else, but a lot of the control I was used to in normal day life has shifted now because of COVID, and things have come up, and it creates this need to find control in different ways. And sometimes that can be helpful and sometimes it could be detrimental to mental health. Obviously, the big ones: increased anxiety, depression, anger, frustration, and the reliance on substance use. And then the last one really is just reaching outside of yourself for healing. So that could be in a good way and kind of reaching out for support, but more importantly, it's kind of reaching outside things like technology or behavioral addictions or food or, some of these substances we were talking about to self-medicate or ease some of these increases in anxiety and depression. So I wanted to take a look at this. So trauma in the minds, it should really be COVID in the minds. And this is an overly complicated slide here, and you don't have to really look into it too much, but I wanted to use this to illustrate how the minds are affected by COVID and trauma and what it looks like. So the three levels you have there, social engagement, the ventral vagal, sympathetic, and the dorsal vagal, those are your nervous systems, the three parts. So you can see how as you travel between those, you're engaging in social engagement or freeze, which is kind of like body collapse or immobility or depression, and also flight or fight, which we talk about a lot. So the I can't feeling of overwhelmness is that freezing. The I can, but also high worry, anxiety, or rage or anger is that sympathetic. And then that connection, that joy, being present, grounded, compassionate, and mindful is that ventral vagal state. And so I put this here just so you could get an idea of, we want, I'm going to point to it, but you guys can't see that. But so we want to be the line that's a little bit of a squiggle. We don't really want to engage in this high hill and then dip, because that means we're cycling between the lower level of dorsal vagal and the sympathetic, which is depression, anxiety, or anger. We want to go in between. Thank you, Gina. Well done. Go in between that social engagement and just enough of that I can that's motivating, and not too much that it's overwhelming. So what's this mean for your youth? So the next slide that we're going to do is going to be focused on what areas we're focused in. So the first one is preschool. Kids who are younger age, aren't quite in school yet. The second one is going to be school age kids, so elementary, middle school. And then the last functioning kind of look is going to be at adolescents. So we're going to go over symptoms and signs of what might be going on for them right now. And keep in mind, a lot of people have some of these already. High anxiety, high depression already as diagnoses. And, what we're talking about with COVID is to see if those have spiked more and are more intense, or if your children have never really exhibited any of these symptoms, their presence might be an indication that they're having a really hard time with COVID and really struggling with mental health needs. So let's go to the preschool. All right, so this is where the timing might be off. Gina, why don't you just go all the way through so they're all listed so we don't have to wait for them to come up. I was trying to be dramatic and have entry level stuff, but it's harder when you have no control of it. So things like fear of being alone, speech difficulties, if there's any random loss of bladder control, bowel control, bedwetting, or constipation, which usually isn't there, that might be a sign. A change in appetite, either eating a lot more or not eating at all. Increased temper tantrums, which we might just attribute to their age or something's wrong with them, but it could really be a sign and indication that they're really struggling with anxiety or understanding what's happening. Whining, clinging behaviors, increased energy, and a lack of focus. Those are the main ones we want to take a look at. If, like I said, if they've increased, or if they haven't been present but are now present, that might be a really good sign that something's going on for them. And then we'll go to the school aged. We'll pull all these up too. A lot of them are repetitive. There are some that are a little bit different based on age, but with school aged and middle school aged kids, really it's more of an irritability. You might have some whining as well, more aggressive behavior, some clinging and nightmares. Again, appetite disturbances, social withdrawal, it tends to be more prevalent at this age because they have more of that social engagement, and then you might see them pulling away. A loss of interest, competition for attention, especially if you have a younger kid at home too, they may regress in some of their behaviors to get that attention. Forgetfulness, and physical reactions, meaning the stress or anxiety that may be manifesting, you might see it in bowel, diarrhea, constipation, or even rashes, or that like scratching. That can happen as well too. And we're going to move on to adolescence now. No big surprise, pretty similar to the middle age, but a little bit different in the sense that with them, there's a lot more physical reactions that happen. There's a lot more agitation. There's at the same time decreased energy and increased energy. So not always for the same kid, but sometimes for the same kid, it can cycle that way as well. the biggest difference is that we start seeing adolescents who have really good coping skills or healthy behaviors or routines start ignoring them and going towards those older unhealthy coping skills or unhealthy behaviors. Isolating is a big one at this age, disturbances of sleep and appetite. And this is where we see a ton of perseverating thoughts kind of come in, and lack of focus. In middle school, we see it too, but I really do think as adolescents come on, more of that perseverating stickiness happens. And so we'll see a lot of hyper focus on some of the smaller concepts that you may have thought were no big deal, but for them, it's on their mind constantly. All right, so next slide. All right, so this is why you guys are here, right? What can we do about this? So there are 5 things that I want to focus on today, and this is just an introductory thing. So if you have questions, feel free, my contact's at the end, feel free to outreach to me or any of those resources that are on those slides, because we're not going to get into the nitty gritty here where it's going to completely shift everything. But I do think talking about these concepts and then trying to do some of these concepts will help not only your youth and you working with your youth, but also yourselves, because I think this is really important. So we're looking at how to help them build resilience to the current way of life, right? Create a structure and routine that's important for now, because we know structure and routine is really important for mental health, especially in times like this. You know, a lot of kids are doing hybrid models, but before this, it was just being at home and not really having a routine or structure. And so it can kind of send people spinning and catastrophizing. So we want to work on creating a good structure and routine, engaging in what we call connected parenting styles, building a practice of mindfulness, and model these shifts that we're talking about to our youth, not just have them do it, but showing them that we're also doing that. And usually when you model, it creates a stronger foundation and more ability to follow through with some of these next routines we're going to go through. All right, so resilience. What is it? Why is it important? And how do we build it? All right, go ahead to the definition. All right, so like I said before, I'm a big fan of going on Google and pulling out definitions. So resilience, the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties and toughness. The second one I could have cut out, but I really want to do some imagery with this. So I think it's actually really important. So the ability of a substance or object to spring back into shape, elasticity, plasticity, suppleness, flexibility. These are all really important, because what resilience truly is how you navigate around some of these sticky spots or boulders that get in the way of things that we're working on, and how to let go of attachments to do that. So we'll talk a little bit about having an open mind in a little bit, but you know, that second definition is great, because if you're too rigid, you snap. If you're more supple, elastic, you bend and you find a way around it. And that's really what we're trying to cultivate. So the benefits of building resilience, well, to start off, it increased immunity. We know through those 5 minds that we talked about, as you build resilience, those things also come online. So immunity to any colds or viruses that are out there, which are super important. But also how our heart functions, how our breathing works, how our nervous system works. Building resilience helps with every piece of the body and the minds together. It also increases self-regulation, which we'll get into a little bit in a couple slides. Improved energy management in the body, meaning just, you know, the energy we put out, we're not expending, we're not depleting too many emotions. We're able to kind of use the energy for what it is and renew it better with resilience. Increased focus and attention, a shift from depleting emotions to renewing emotions, like I just mentioned. Development of self-awareness. You really do some introspection in resilience building. So it's important with self-awareness to kind of come online to do this work, which can also help with any other diagnoses that may be there, like ADHD, anxiety, or depression. And also an increased tolerance of others. So I don't know about you, but I'm in a house full of some people, a 5-year-old and my wife, and having some tolerance for other people right now is a huge benefit. So again, this is for everyone. So take from this presentation what you want. Next slide. All right, so 7 key factors that we're going to talk about in resilience building alone. So emotional control, impulse control, maintaining an open mind, optimism, self-esteem, empathy, and reaching out. Those are all things that you've probably heard about. I'm going to get a little in depth about each one and give you some tips on that. So we're going to go to emotional control first. Again, a fantastic graph that I found in a program that I do, which is called Heart Math, which mainly focuses on the heart mind. And this is just to symbolize what we're talking about with an emotional control, the idea of depleting emotions and renewing emotions, and how the nervous system and hormones like cortisol and DHEA affect negative, positive, high arousal or low arousal. So in each realm, what we're kind of looking at is, hey, you can have high nervous system arousal and be happy and excited. That's the positive aspect of it. And the middle ground is love and appreciation, and the lower arousal is contentment and serenity. And the same thing for depleting emotions. High arousal is often anger and anxiety, frustration and resentment, and then low arousal is apathy and sadness. And that kind of goes hand in hand with that graph that I showed earlier. We'll go to the next one. So impulse control. I included this picture because when I was thinking of COVID and impulse control, I immediately went to toilet paper and the crazy buyout of all the toilet paper that happened. And really, we're talking about impulse control for resilience building because in these times when we're talking about that need for control, if we can't look at our own impulses and try to exert some control over those, we can end up doing more harm than good by I'm sure some of you have kids who are really addicted to technology or screens right now because they're going for that feel good dopamine rush, which a lot of impulse control is, or, for people maybe eating more, carbohydrates or dairy because those are huge dopamine producers. So you're going for that impulsive grab because it makes you feel good in those moments. So looking at our own impulse self-awareness in our kids is going to be important. And the next slide actually talks a little bit about how we can slow down the impulse reaction and start thinking about new things. So this is a little trick I've learned throughout the years, and it's simple, but it's also effective. So if you can figure this out with your kids and how to implement it, it's going to be bang on for you because it's really how to stop in the moment, take a breath before reacting, think about outcomes, using some of the skills of cognitive behavioral therapy, think about how our thoughts and emotions affect outcomes, and then do, right? And so for some kids I work with, I'll have them create a stop sign that you can put around the house so that it's a visual cue of, hey, you may not be there right now, but remember to stop, breathe, think, and then do. Other kids, adolescents I work with, sometimes I use my history of doing personal training or some martial arts background where it's about doing a check-in, taking those breaths first, maybe not having the same flow, to take a pause and think through it. Or in martial arts, there's this theory, if you keep your tongue to the roof of your mouth at all time, it creates a natural pause before you react. So sometimes just having that intention and checking in before you say something or do something is, hey, is my tongue there? It'll give you a small pause so you can stop and think and breathe and then do. Next slide. Maintaining an open mind, or, in yoga, we call this beginner's mind, right? And so I included Bruce Lee's famous quote about water, and it feeds back into that definition of the second definition of resilience of, having an open mind or a beginner's mind as you approach something is not too assertive. You take steps to approach it lightly, see what the deal is about this situation, think about what you can bring to it, and also learn from it. And I think having this open mind, one, of other people and engaging with other people is really important, but also knowing that you don't need to know everything. As parents, you don't need to know everything how to solve the issue because COVID is something that's out there that we don't have a ton of control over. But if you approach things with a beginner's mind, and if your youth can do that too, you can find a way around this. You can be formless, you can empty your mind, you can be shapeless, and you can find a way through the toughest wall, through the small cracks. And so that's why I really felt Bruce Lee's quote here was really pertinent, of a beginner's mind and open mind is how you approach things, and know that you don't have to have the solution, just the fact that you're there trying it out is a learning experience. Next slide, please. So optimism. So there's a couple of slides here. When you think of optimism, a lot of times we think about toxic positivity. I mean, we think about, oh, go back. We think about positive versus negative, right? And I'm here to kind of tell you that optimism is not just positive versus negative, because there is such thing as toxic positivity. And that means when we try to force positivity in a situation that doesn't really have that mindset yet, it creates this new routine of suppressing actual emotions and really putting on a smile on your face. And that can be more negative for mental health than actually looking at the situation and really trying to figure out, okay, how can I use optimism, right? So toxic positivity is not just positive versus negative. I look at it more as generative outcomes versus limiting outcomes, right? Because there are some situations that aren't going to have amazing positive outcomes, but definitely will have more generative, meaning opening new doors or possibilities for your youth or yourself, as opposed to limiting. And so I really like to look at optimism as generative versus limiting. And in that definition, it really hits home that it's not always sunshine, rainbows, and kittens. It's sometimes looking for the best outcome of the situation. And then I wanted to also throw up Siddhartha Gautama, that you guys may know as the Buddha, and his quote on what we think we become, meaning that we're not victims of our thought process, but the more we think a certain thing, the stronger that response is in us. And we really have to look at that conditioning. Next one. Self-esteem. So there's an amazing website down here, oddly enough, called Positive. It's called Authentic Happiness, but it's the home base for positive psychology. And I know we just talked about toxic positivity, but they don't really engage in that. So no worries with that. This is probably the biggest thing I get from parents is, how do I build self-esteem for my youth, especially now that social interactions are limited, they're not seeing their friends as much. And the hardest thing to work with parents on is, a lot of this self-esteem has to come from the youth and through their interactions, because they get to a certain age where are telling them that they're smart or brilliant or funny or creative or pretty or handsome can only go so far. It's great to say those things because we also want to be letting them know how we view them. But at a certain point, they're going to start to catch on and like, okay, that's mom and dad, or that's mom and mom, or grandma, or whoever is the caregiver in their life. And they're going to say, they have to say that. So it's really not true. And then sometimes it actually goes further and they start to not believe it because you say it so much. So one of the things with self-esteem that I think is really important is looking at strengths. And so the reason why I included Authentic Happiness, the website here, is because they have what's called a brief strengths test, which is a small clip there of what it looks like, which will allow you and the youth to kind of go through these questionnaires, and it will tell you what some of the strengths are. So it's a good way for them to be proactive in figuring out what their strengths are if they can't sit down and have that conversation with you. Because some kids are really good at that and they can take a look at their strengths, and other kids may draw a blank and you have to really work with them. So this brief test is helpful. And then what you do once you find those is say you do check-ins with them, and instead of saying, hey, you were awesome today, or you do, and then it's followed by, how did you use your strengths today? What did you do with your strengths to really utilize them? And if you didn't, what could you do tomorrow? So that way it's generating this stream of self-esteem that they're empowering themselves through their own strengths. Next slide. So important keys to empathy. So an important thing to remember is that empathy and sympathy are different. We often equate the two together, but the concept here, the difference between empathy and sympathy is feeling bad for that person or feeling like understanding what they're going through, whereas empathy is actually feeling it and really have been there and connecting to that person to understand what is happening. So a couple keys to building empathy. Self-awareness and awareness of others is the big thing. If you're walking around oblivious to things, empathy is a really hard thing to build in yourself or with others. Understanding how your actions make other people feel, regardless of intent, also a big thing. A lot of times, especially in nowadays, people are getting called out for things and they become defensive. And so that puts you at odds with the other person. If you can't hear how your actions made the other person feel, regardless of what your intent was, it's really hard to build empathy, because that's a connection that needs to be there for empathy building. Emotional intelligence, your own, and how emotions work for other people. Active listening. So actually having a conversation and waiting for that person to answer, and listening and reflecting and validating it before you respond, and not just waiting for your own response to talk over them. Compassion and gratitude. In that graph that we saw of the squiggly line and that big dip that we were trying to avoid, compassion and gratitude is really important, because to truly engage in compassion and gratitude, you have to be in that level that we want to be of calmness and connection to engage. So it can be really emotionally regulating for other people, but also for yourself. So it's a little hack that is really important to pay attention to. And then I think the biggest thing that people fail to talk about with empathy is having healthy boundaries. If you engage in empathy too much, that's a great strength to have, but if you're letting people kind of walk over you because of it, if you don't have, or your youth doesn't have a good, healthy boundary with other people, they're going to take on everyone's stuff. And it's going to be harder for them to do the lifting, because now they're carrying 2 or 3 people's emotions and not just their own. Next slide. Reaching out. So I think reaching out's a fantastic way to end the 7 resilience building factors, because it's about reaching out for help, like we've talked about, knowing when you need help, advocating for yourself. But the other important part of reaching out that I want you guys to take away from this is challenging yourself, reaching outside of your comfort zone, because that's where real change comes from. And I think it's really important, especially now when a lot of our stuff is limited, to reach outside of your comfort zone appropriately and challenge yourself to new things, so we can build new structure and routine and new hobbies and interests that may not be as good as the ones we had, but are enough so that we can keep growing and moving forward. Next slide. Oh, speaking about structures and routines, it's almost like I planned those slides together. The importance about structure and routine is simple. Routines help build emotional regulation, like we were seeing, depleting and renewing emotions. Routine is helpful for that, because you can know what to expect. You can also plan around it, and you know when to put in coping skills when you need them, right? And engage with other people and reach out to other people as you need them. It allows for understanding of expectation. With no control going on right now over COVID, the expectation of things is so skewed. And so if we can create some kind of understanding of what the day looks like, or the week or the month looks like, it can be really beneficial. It's also things like, if we're on Zoom calls, dressing up, wearing a shirt and pants and not just having PJ bottoms, or, like doing those things so you're still in that routine, so you can separate home life and work life, or school life and work life appropriately. It creates discipline through repetition. If you're creating a good structure and routine and you're implementing it consistently, it can create discipline through the repetition of that. Decreases power struggles, also allows for a sense of security and support, feeling grounded at home. Decreases anxiety and depression, again, because you know what to expect, and you can start kind of taking a look at the day and implementing some skill building that you might work with your therapists or supports to do. And then allows for a sense of control. Again, this is a big one with COVID, is if we're feeling like a lack of control, having structure and routine will give us a small amount of control. And so we can really use that healthy control instead of reaching outside of ourselves again. So connected parenting was the third thing. And I think this is really important, because again, we're spending so much time at home. It's really hard to engage in a certain way. And so I think connected parenting is really just taking the time to engage with your youth. I know we're all busy. I know we're all either working in our business or at home working for the business while they're in school, or at home doing school, and everything's kind of interwoven, and our stresses from work can come out on our youth. But really taking the time to engage with them, doing things with them so they don't feel neglected, or checking in with them, even if it's a minute or two, understanding where their perspective is. I saw a good meme online about, we, at one point, our youth were in school having fun, seeing friends, and that was all taken away from them for months. And we really need to sometimes slow down and look at their perspective and what they're going through. Join with their feelings and their point of view kind of goes along with that perspective. Setting firm and realistic limits, so much is happening, so much is technology related, but it's still really important to set firm and realistic limits with them, because they need to know that, again, going to structure and routine, what that is. And, we often feel like, okay, that it's a rough time, let them have as much TV or video games as they want. But we also have to balance that out with their mental health needs and setting limits that are realistic. And then explain your reasoning for things. This is a big thing because they're trying to get control. They may fight you for that control if they don't understand what's happening. But if you take that time and explain it to them and the reasoning and why and what it does, they may still be mad at you. Most likely they will, but now they're understanding why. And our job as parents is to help them create that rational, logical brain. And if we're not explaining that reasoning, especially now, they're not going to listen at times. And so I think that's an important part of connected parenting. All right, we're rolling around along. We got two more. Mindfulness is where we're starting. So mindfulness, you've heard it. It's a buzzword. Really, the definition that most therapists and mindfulness practitioners use is this idea of being present right now in this moment on purpose and without judgment. So being present now, not tomorrow, not in the morning, not yesterday, in the moment on purpose, right? You can stub your toe and be present in the moment right now because of the pain, but that's not on purpose. And so on purpose is really important because it helps us get some sense of control. Okay, I may not control this outside of my mind, but right now I'm choosing to be present. And without judgment is a simple thing, not judging others, but also not judging yourself. If I'm talking to you and I'm trying to be mindful, but my mind is over here thinking about pizza for dinner, I might start judging that. And then now I'm way over here and I'm not right here where I need to be to have the conversation. I included the cartoon because I think this is funny and a summation of being mindful and being mindful. And they use the dichotomy of a human and a dog to really illustrate the point of mindfulness. So mindfulness practices. So things like coloring, reading, exercise, eating, conversation, and yes, even cleaning and working can all be done mindfully, right? It's all about being present while you're doing that. So if I'm doing dishes and I'm watching TV, I'm not practicing mindfulness. But if I'm doing dishes and I'm paying attention to the grease and the stuck on things on the plates and cleaning those off, and really every time I get distracted, bring it back to what I'm doing, that's mindfulness in practice. So a good quote I like is on the next slide, and that is, everything can be done mindfully, but not everything is mindfulness, right? So like I was saying, dishes can be done mindfully, but doing dishes in and of themselves is not practicing mindfulness. Same thing with coloring, reading, even meditating, right? So how does it help? Why is it important? Well, it helps with emotional regulation because we find that being present stops forward thinking or backwards thinking. And a lot of times anxiety and depression are keyed into the future and the past. And so it can help you regulate your emotions if you stay present right now. It balances your nervous system reactions because you're teaching your nervous system, hey, I'm not in danger. I don't have to worry about things because right now, this is my task. This is what I'm doing, and there's no danger. Obviously, if you try to do mindfulness and a bear is chasing you, it's not going to balance your nervous system reactions because you need to stay alive. So I just say run. Don't worry about mindfulness in that moment, but that's kind of how it helps nervous system reactions. It helps with reality testing your thoughts because when you're catastrophizing, you're weighing the future. If you bring it back into the present, you can start looking at steps you can do to challenge yourself or challenge the need or what you're doing right now and looking at the reality of the situation. It builds tolerance. How many of you guys have had kids say that they're bored during this time of COVID and they just need something to do? So they go to technology or they do whatever, they do escapism, they watch TV, they, whatever it is. Practicing mindfulness actually builds tolerance to that boredom because it's like, okay, I have nothing to do. What can I create? Or how can I be mindful about how to entertain myself without being distracted by being pulled out of the current situation? And then it also, like we said, manages that need for control because you're exerting control by choosing where you're focusing your mind. So we're going to actually do, I think it's the next slide. We're actually going to do a mindfulness exercise. So I'm going to set a timer on my phone. We are going to spend 3 minutes doing this exercise. And then we're going to well, we can't really talk about it, but I want you to think about it as we go through this, because I think it's really important. So a good way to practice mindfulness is this. We're going to take 3 minutes. We're going to allow ourselves to just think. Don't try to judge yourself. Don't try to regulate your mind to be on task. Really just let your thoughts go. And now, so a caveat to this, if you're naturally anxious or depressed, you want to be careful with this, because sometimes letting the thoughts go can lead to catastrophizing or perseverating thoughts. So if you feel like you won't be able to do this without having a negative outcome in this moment, because it takes some work to do, I don't want to just throw this at you. Take a break, do something else to entertain yourself. But right now, those who can, I want to do this activity. So let the thoughts come up and then mark down either on your phones or a piece of paper every time, for all three, past, present, and future, every time your thought is in one of those things, because we want to do a tally and we really want to see where our thoughts go. And for your viewing pleasure, my good friend, Dr. Christopher Willard, came up with this GIF that's in the top of this slide. And if you find yourself spinning out of control and catastrophizing, try to sync your breath to the inhale and the exhale of this GIF in the top. All right. All right. So I'm going to start now. All right. So that was 3 minutes of practicing mindfulness, just tracking where your thoughts had gone. And so before we move on to the next slide, I just want you to spend some time thinking about what your tallies look like and what's it mean. Because most times when I do this, people get really excited and say, hey, look, it was equal all the way through. 5 marks in the past, 5 in the present, 5 in the future, where it's balanced. And I think that's great because it gives you some information of how quickly, just in 3 minutes, you get to where your thoughts are. But my great Scott gif. But the reality is we're trying with mindfulness to be mostly in the present. So this gives you some sense of what we're talking about with mindfulness is centering thoughts in the present. Even if they go into the future or the past, that's okay. But bringing it back to the present is the real one. And I hope that those 3 minutes gave you some kind of sense of how often your thoughts change or where your thoughts usually lie, because it will give you more insight when you practice mindfulness. All right, next one. All right, so modeling. So I referenced this before about the foundations of modeling some of these practices. And I think this is a really important visualization to use, is this idea of a pyramid. Like I was saying before, our job as parents is to help our youth create emotional awareness, but also the rational mind and the logical mind, so that they have all the skills when they get to 18 or when they go to college or when they become adults to do it on their own, maybe even a little bit before. So I like this because we often think of the tip of the pyramid is, hey, they just have to do it. But there's a lot of layers before the youth even start practicing mindfulness or resilience building or the structure and routine or connection, right? And it really comes from our own practice. This is the bottom layer. And then any other, the parents' practice, so significant others, grandparents, whoever's a caregiver in your child's life, I think it's really important that that's the next layer in tandem with your own. And then teaching the practices to the youth comes after our own practice building, then integrating the techniques in life. And then, and only then, until those layers are really fleshed out, will the youth start to build their own practice on it. So it seems like an uphill battle because it is. We have to do a lot of the heavy lifting and teach and integrate, and then they will take it up and start their practices. Next slide. So thank you. That's my presentation on resilience building and building resilient youth in troubling times. And so included in this, you'll have my contact, my email, and I know Gina's email and Carrie's email are coming up too after the resources. So feel free to outreach to me if you have any questions about any of this. We do have the question and answer part, but any other stuff.
So Steve, I am actually going to make a little decision here. We were going to share resources and do a couple of things and then do Q&A, but I'm looking at the time and I do feel committed to ending on time at 8 o'clock.
Okay.
Which means we really.
Sorry, I'm a little long-winded about this stuff. I love it so much. So
that's okay. What I'm going to propose is that I synthesize a few questions that have come in.
Okay. Sure.
In the registration, and I would prefer to give, because we will be sending the resource guide to everyone that is registered. So I feel like it's probably more important right now. I do want to reserve a moment at the end to just remind you that there are resources and say a little bit more about the coalition. So we're going to be really quick on a few of the questions, but I have to say that the questions really did seem to cluster in some very similar categories. And there were a number that had to do with how do we help kids right now safely socialize. Our student, my son is doing okay, but seems to be more socially withdrawn right now. So what can I do to promote and encourage healthy connections? And kind of related to that, in the spectrum of this, my child is resisting the mask wearing. How can I allow for those safe connections while still maintaining those safe and healthy precautions that are so important? So that's kind of the cluster of how do we help our kids to stay connected socially right now when you've got 30 seconds?
Oh, 30 seconds. Oh, that's quick. So I think really it's just thinking outside the box on a lot of the social situations. So I think having a pod or a group of kids who are thinking about things in the same way, the family, what they're doing. I think you can't overlook the importance of socialization and it becomes a COVID versus mental health situation sometimes. And I'm not saying or advocating to go against the rules of COVID, but I think carving out small pods of kids that are being smart about things, that may be doing the distancing, that are wearing the mask, is really important. The mask question is a tricky one. I think really engaging in your youth who is not wearing a mask to say, okay, you have that choice, but there's a natural consequence to it, and it's going to limit the social interactions with in-person social interactions with some of those pod kids as well, and still allow him or her to have some kind of social interaction, maybe through Zoom, maybe through phone calls, maybe through FaceTime, but really tie it to natural consequences of, hey, if you're not willing to do that, I don't feel comfortable with you going out and doing those things. Now, obviously, there's some more issues with that if they choose to just go out and do that. But in 30 seconds, that's the best answer I got for you.
Okay, so we have another question that's really near and dear to my heart in terms of the mental health connection. And someone has asked how we might build resilience for a child or children who have some sort of a trauma history, or and in saying that, I also recognize that trauma is highly personal. So we don't necessarily, the range of things that could create a trauma history for a child can be extremely different.
Yeah.
But let's kind of factor that out for a moment and say, what the resilience and trauma, how do we make those two come together?
So resilience and trauma, I think you have to get some outside resources, because no matter how great you are as a parent or a caregiver for a kid, they're going to need some professionals to help them with the trauma experience and building their own response to resilience to that trauma, initial trauma, and working through it and processing it and letting go of it in their body. But then also any re-triggering traumas that come up based on this pandemic, that's going to be important to have a game plan. So some of those resilience building things I put out there is also indicative of trauma responses, but I would push it off to that resource page and finding someone who can connect and do that one-on-one work, because it is very important and personal. And any answer I give is going to be different for each kid that I'm working with.
Right, and I appreciate you saying that, because you're absolutely right. Some of those strategies like predictable routines and things like that are excellent no matter for any child, and may be of particular value for children who maybe have a trauma history. But I think it goes to that, what we said, it's so individual, it's so personal, and being able to have that connection or resource that's more focused on what's going on for your particular child, I think is a great idea. I want to make sure we get to a couple more questions here, because we had some really great ones. How do we help a child who might be struggling with expressing themselves verbally and in writing and has trouble communicating what their needs might be? And this person does mention that there is school-based support. So maybe how might that translate into a home environment?
Right. I mean, I think if the school is having a good time and engaging and helping that kid co-regulate, it's about communicating with home things that they found to be helpful. So it's standard across the field. So at home and at school, so that we're not trying to do different things and having different outcomes. I do think there are many different therapeutic modalities for expression of emotions and feelings. And I would say looking into art therapy or some art therapy techniques, expressive therapy through acting and dancing, or maybe not writing, because it said, writing isn't quite doing that, but maybe writing a story where it's not focused on them, but it can kind of articulate through the perception of a character, could be helpful as well.
Right. I think those are also great suggestions. We have a number of questions that I think your presentation has covered. So in the interest of time, I would maybe like to ask to end the question portion with one that is probably very near and dear to your heart. How do we build mindfulness and wellness as a family? What are some activities that we can do as a family?
Perfect. Yeah, it's a tough one. Like I said, anything can really be mindfulness. It's just how you do it. So some of my favorite ones are going on family walks. It's something me and my daughter actually did a lot of early days of COVID because we lived in a place where there weren't a lot of people around and we could go on walks and just be present in that moment and look at the trees and kind of smell the smells and kind of see what's out there, try to find out if there were any animals in the woods. Obviously, hopefully no bears because that wouldn't be great. But even art nights, doing art together, you can mindfulness can be watching TV together as long as you're not just completely sucked into that screen and you're actually communicating. I think comedies are great for mindful watching because you can engage and look at each other and laugh at the same things and pause and have communications about it. Reading, uh, artistic play, playing together is a big one. I know some of the kids may be older, but playing sports or engaging in those ways, which is one of the things with connected parenting, is if you find what motivates your kid and you can engage with them in that, and you can do that mindfully, the mindfulness aspect will rub off, and you can start doing mindfulness without even knowing you're doing mindfulness because you're just choosing to be present in those moments.
Right.
But engaging your senses is the best way to do it. Anything that engages smell, sight, touch, taste, anything of that nature in a way that registers can be a mindfulness experience.
I think so many families too have found this pandemic period of time to explore like different cooking strategies
Yeah,
at
cooking's
home,
fantastic.
or maybe delving into grandma's recipe book or something like that, and then telling stories about the family traditions that maybe go with some of
That's
these
fantastic.
things. So there are
Yeah,
so
when you think
many different ways, and I think also varying the program a little bit so that people have an opportunity to try different ways to engage with each other. And it can be a very special time as well as a very stressful time. We all recognize
exactly,
that. So if
it's
you can
finding
hang
that
on
control over it.
just a second. So here's some contact info that I'm going to share in just a moment. But Carrie, are you there? And can you really quickly just tell us a little bit?
I'm sorry,
Because
Carrie, I was too long-winded.
no, it's okay. Because Steve began really, I think, with that idea of what's typical development and what are the signs and symptoms of concern. And it always reminds me that parents are really the people that tend to have the best sense of what their child's baseline is. And that might be those kind of, yep, you're feeling like it's time to reach out. So when it is time to reach out, Carrie, what can you tell us a little bit about the slide we're looking at right now?
Yes, absolutely. Good evening, community, and thank you all for attending. So there are various resources in the community regarding therapeutic support, and I'm just going to go briefly over some of them. So if your child or even a family member or a parent is experiencing a crisis, which could be including some suicidal ideation, some thoughts, complete isolation. I've had some experiences out in the community where there are some kids who have isolated and have a very difficult time, which had led into some significant depression. You can call BHN Crisis. They are 24/7, and the number is 733-6661. There's also individual therapy support for adults and children and adults to have that one-on-one therapeutic support. Intensive care coordination is another service where if you really need an intensive approach with the family, including parents, natural supports, family members, to do some coordination and to support your family regarding these transitions from due to COVID, there's also ICC. In-home therapy is a wonderful support that can come into the home and work with the child and work with the parent or parents regarding how to build healthier communication and come up with strategies in the home to decrease the level of aggression or depression. And all these services are individual based on family needs. There's also therapeutic mentoring, which the therapeutic mentor provides support to the child on working with the child to be able to transition through this pandemic on transitional life skills, some anger management, and basic skills. in-home behavioral services. If you have a child who is struggling with extreme behaviors due to COVID-19, there's in-home behavioral services as well. We've also seen an increase of substance abuse and relapse through this COVID-19. There are various substance abuse outpatient treatment and treatment centers. And also, if you feel that you need some more support for a few days, there's also respite. There's contact information. Behavioral Health Network provides that support. Center for Human Development. Okay, so we are in family resources. So we have a family resource. That's okay. So we have a family. There's also many family resources. These are just a snapshot of what is available. We have the Family Resource Center through Behavioral Health Network. And if you feel that you just need to talk to somebody and reach out for resources, whether you might be struggling with economic impact, fuel assistance, financial support, SNAP benefits, that is what they're there for. We also have the Family Support Network through the Western Mass Training Consortium, and they provide family support to families regarding reaching out to resources. The Western Mass Recovery and Learning Center provides walk-in hours for adolescents who are struggling and adults who are struggling with substance abuse. And then we have the Department of Transitional Assistance. If you are in an economic hardship, there's Western Mass Food Banks. You can look online if you're struggling due to the economic hardships of COVID. You can also look to see where the food banks are in your local area. And we also have the Empowerment Center for veterans and their family members. If you have a veteran who you reside with, and family members also can receive support regarding clothing support, medical supplies, and food.
Carrie, that was a whirlwind tour, but this last slide, I think, kind of sums it up. Seeing a therapist doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It means that you are looking for that clarity, trying to deal with complex emotions, maybe working. These mental health is mental wellness. So let's make sure that we work together to stop the stigma and to encourage getting support when it is needed. And I do want to mention, while all of those resources are amazing, and all of you who are with us tonight will get an email with a resource guide attached that includes that and so much more, as well as the coalition website. The pediatrician is often really your best first stop in terms of, certainly not in terms of those emergency situations, but in terms of just figuring out how to get that referral and navigating a sometimes very complicated system. So don't hesitate to work with your pediatrician. Here's the contact information for today. We are really encouraging you to get to that website, HampdenWilbrahamPartnersForYouth.org. If you need specific school-based assistance, some of our questions have to do with where do I find tutoring, or how do I get the plan to kind of come together with the school. Those types of questions really need to go to your school administrator or counselor at your child's school so that they can help you connect the dots. For additional questions on tonight's program, here's our contact information. And I want to put a big commercial plug in here. When you go to the coalition website, you will see information about youth mental health first aid training. This is a training that is available to anyone in the community, any adult over 18 who interacts with kids. And it really does help us understand the signs and symptoms, the warning signs of a potential mental health crisis, and how to interact with a youth who might be struggling. And it might be our son or our daughter, or it might be one of their friends, or it might be a neighbor's child, and we're trying to maybe help a neighbor to see what resources might be available. It's a long course, it's 8 hours, but we can divide it up into smaller bites. And all we need is 5 people. So get 4 of your friends, email me, call me, and we would be very happy to. We have a space at Thornton Burgess where we can present these classes safely at a socially distant manner. So please consider taking a youth mental health first aid course. Save the date for our next topic, which will be about teens and vaping, which we know is unfortunately a significant issue. Tentatively right now scheduled for November 19th, but please stay tuned on that. I want to thank you so much. Please try my QR code because I was so proud to be able to include it. So if you want to scan this right now, it's going to take you right to the evaluation form, I promise. And if it doesn't, don't worry, because you'll be getting an email from me that has the link to the evaluation form. We so appreciate that you take the time to complete these evaluations. It matters to us, the coalition, to be able to be responsive to the interests that you as parents may have that are important in the community to continue to deliver that safe, healthy, and strong message. On behalf of the Hampden Wilbraham Partners for Youth Coalition, and one more special thank you to the Rotary Club of Hampden Wilbraham, and to Steve. I messed up your name. Oh,
It's
say it
okay.
again. Steve, your last name is
Opalenik.
Opalenik. I
Yeah.
said it wrong, but
It's okay.
you set me straight.
No one ever gets it right. It's okay.
And Carrie O'Connor, our community resource specialist at Hampden Wilbraham Regional School District. I thank you so much for being with us tonight, for your patience, and for hanging in with us those few extra moments. We thank you. We hope it was worthwhile, and we look forward to our next visit.